Spikes, balls, blobs, plants with strong sculptural shapes are known as architectural plants, and they give your garden year-round interest and impact. So I've come to the home of architectural plants, a nursery which is actually called Architectural Plants, to talk to Managing Director Guy Watts about how to use blobberies, balls and architectural plants in your garden design. It's Alexandra here from the Middle-Sized Garden YouTube channel and blog. So Guy, can you firstly define what an architectural plant is for me?
So it's a term that's been used for many years, but we just deem it as about shape and form. So it's about having structure in a plant. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be evergreen, although the majority of plants are, because they're easier to shape and see. So we use deciduous plants too, and it can be multi-stems, it can be balls, blobs, it can be anything really, but it's shape and form and structure.
I first heard about blobberies when architectural plants were exhibiting at the Garden Press event, and I thought this sounds wonderful. And I looked it up, and Google said rather sort of condescendingly, "Did you mean how to grow blueberries?" I said, no. And then it went on to tell me that actually some garden designers use the term blobberies quite in a way to denigrate, to say it's very shapeless. But if I look at the groupings of blobs you've got here, they are actually very defined, they're very structural and strong. So could you tell me what blobberies are?
Now, we believe that we actually coined the term blobberies. It's something Angus used many years ago and was in our catalogue into the 1990s, because it's that sort of formation of lots of plants together. Often they're wider than they are taller, which gives you that lovely sort of squashed ball look. And they are exactly that, they're blobs, but we then mix them together, so it could be different types of plants, different shapes, and they often merge together. So yeah, I agree. A blob to us is something that's very defined. It's beautifully clipped, often quite a lot, quite a few times a year, depending on the species.
And how would you use a blobbery in a garden design?
It could be underplanted a tree if you're using sort of shade-tolerant plants for a blobbery, or it could be in a very sunny position. Again, just as a sort of almost a piece of living art, a sculpture. You can add other elements to it that are perhaps deciduous, so you get pops of autumn colour. Or viburnum tinus is a great plant to use in a blobbery because you get that lovely white flower in the winter.
Is there a sort of like, you've got to have 3, you've got to have 5, you've got to have uneven amounts, or are there any like rules like that?
Generally we use odd numbers for design, and I know lots of people do, we do that, but blobberies are different because imagine this as being one form that's clipped together over time. So initially, yes, you may use an odd number, but it becomes a singular form over time. So it's not as important as it is in other design aspects.
And what plants do you use for blobberies?
We use all sorts, so Taxus baccata, which is yew, which is an evergreen. Prunus lusitanica is a big one for us, although it has slightly larger leaves. There's Ilex crenata, which a lot of people are using. We find it a little bit unreliable, so we don't use it on a big scale. Obviously box is completely out because of caterpillar and box blight. I know gardens are still starting to use box again, but I'm a little nervous of that at the moment. Deciduous plants, I really like things like an evergreen form, Lollipops, but there's vulgare, which is like it's a deciduous form. So honestly, almost anything, as long as it doesn't mind being clipped.
Would never think of honeysuckle as being a clipped plant, but it's very clipped.
I think Lollipops has got a bit of a bad reputation, and we've been growing it for many years. But I mean, I stopped selling box through architecture plants 10 years ago. That's how long it's been going for us. So Lollipops is something that we go to because it's a really robust plant. Yes, it's quite fast growing, that's the only thing, but it does have small leaves and you can clip it incredibly tightly. So it's a fantastic plant for that. But I quite like a mixed blobbery, so yew is excellent because it's a little slower, a bit more traditional. And if you mix that with Lollipops, then you're not having such a huge maintenance cost, because that's the other thing you've got to bear in mind. Someone does need to clip this, and it can often be between 2 and 4 times per year.
And I've also seen some really lovely ones with beech and hornbeam and things like that, because those go a lovely autumn colour, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
Of course, they never lose their leaves, do they? But
beech is better for that, unless it's a carpinus that's been bred to hold its leaf longer, which a lot of them are now in Northern Europe. But biggest beech is a brilliant plant to add that lovely colour. We just built one recently in Kent, a big garden with a lovely blobbery of mixed evergreens, and we use Fagus as our deciduous option, and they give you, as you said, that lovely coppery brown colour throughout the winter as well.
And in terms of other architectural plants, how would you sort of divide them up?
So we're very much design led. We mix plants together. That fusion's really important. So jungly and tropical, I think you mentioned, with big leaves, they definitely act as it. You can also have English topiary, and we definitely would call that an architectural plants. Japanese topiary, which tends to be Nawaki. So it's like a big bonsai in the ground. Garden tree is the definition. This is one here. It's an Osmanthus Nawaki. So Nawaki is garden tree. That's the translation, and it's a large bonsai would be the best way to describe it. So that's very Japanese. And then obviously the jungly side is you've got to have the right environment for that. And we do quite a lot of jungle tropical gardens in London and on the south coast. And bear in mind that almost our beginning of our business was very much that. It was big leaf exotics. Some plants are born architectural and some, we say, are thrust upon them but through creative maintenance. It depends.
How long does it take, and how old is a tree like this one, for example?
The art form of Nawaki is obviously a lot slower. It's a slow process. The idea is you take a plant that has some qualities that mean it could have maybe some multi-stems, some loose branching, and Nawaki tends to have these lovely horizontal branches with cloud forms on them. So you're starting to find a plant that looks like you could do that to it, and then over time you develop this product. This plant is somewhere between probably 15 to 20 years old. You can create a Nawaki quite quickly with an existing shrub, but it will take many years for it to form and fully put its clouds out essentially. Other plants, and one of the things we really pride ourselves on is going into someone's garden, seeing a shrub and then turning it into something architecturally beautiful. So it might just be a simple hedging plant, Elaeagnus abingii being one. We might see that it's got some really nice stems below. So we'll remove the foliage and create a multi-stem. We may then shape it from above with our shears. So you can create an architectural plant quite quickly, unless it's a form like this, which takes time.
In terms of using an architectural plant as a focal point, have you got any advice?
Absolutely. We like to have sort of focal trees, specimen trees at the end of avenues, for example, and that's where a solo plant, whether it's in the ground or in a pot, can work really, really well. So finding little vistas in the garden, little viewing points where you have a solo plant. Architectural plants works beautifully in that way because you get to see it from all sorts of angles. However, we also just build planting beds where it can be made up entirely of architectural plants. And I think that's when I'm driving around and I see gardens, I can often point out our gardens because we almost entirely use architectural plants in them. We possibly sometimes add a few bits of softening with hebes or grasses, but we try and use them almost everywhere, and that's what most of our customers come to us for, is to have shape and form in their garden.
So what would you say is the most popular architectural plant? What's the one that people think of first?
Oh, that's a hard question. I think the most obvious one now is Nawaki, just because they stand out, but I do feel that's probably more of a trend. And I think it's very, very hard to beat a beautifully clipped ball or blob. You know, they are traditionally work in most gardens, so I think they will stand the test of time. You know, your blobs and your balls, they're fantastic.
And what you've got here is some blobs that have sort of grown up and are now multi-stemmed blobs as well, haven't you? And that's rather lovely.
As well as gardens and a nursery, we are true growers, so it's really important to imagine you're a nursery and you have 100 hedging plants and maybe you sell 80 of them and there's 20 left, and then they get potted on, and then you start to see that that would look quite nice as a multi-stem. So as a grower, we get this incredible opportunity to take a plant, a simple hedging plant, like I said earlier, and we turn it into something special. It might even be a Nawaki if it's got the right form. It might be a multi-stem. We've got some very interesting sort of single solo pieces that are topiarised into a shape, and we let the plant do the talking. We let it creates its own form by its having grown in that way. And so that's our favourite thing. That's creative maintenance, basically. It's taking something and making it more beautiful or more aesthetically pleasing, and really listening to the plant and telling us, seeing what it wants it to do.
And you said that sometimes you'll go into someone's garden and there's a sort of lump of a shrub and you'll see the shape of it and then you'll cut it.
Yeah.
I had one of these in my garden. It was literally a holly golden king and it was just a lump, and Charlotte Molesworth came and said, oh, you should topiarise that, and it has been, and it's been really successful. What sort of shrubs could you turn from a lump into a lovely shape?
So the art of reduction, which is what it's about, is looking at your garden and thinking, rather than removing that, what can we do with it? Honestly, we're very experimental. That's a huge part of what we do, is to look and try and different experiment. So I would experiment. If you're not happy with what you have, I would experiment. General rules are, if it's flowering, maybe wait for it to finish flowering. Avoid very hot days. Avoid very cold days. Other than that, unless you're very precious about a plant, I would have a go. And I would be, when we talk about reduction, I always look at the volume of a plant and I say 10 to 20% removal is quite safe. In terms of go-to plants that you definitely should do, holly, yew, so taxus, prunus, except in June, so no prunus and Junus. Generally speaking though, I say experiment, have fun. We have an apprenticeship scheme here called AP Homegrown, and part of that is about making mistakes. That's a really important part of a garden, is to make mistakes, learn from them, maybe clip it and it doesn't work out, but it's going to grow back. So yeah, almost any evergreen, really.
Lovely. Sculptural architectural plants and blobberies in pots. You have loads of lovely pots here, so presumably they all work in pots.
The most important thing with pots is I think about plants that have qualities that can be clipped. So they might be a Nawaki, they may be a ball or a blob. Aces are quite good in pots, check on the variety. Olives, and I'm thinking here about plants that can be clipped. So you're naturally taking some of the weight, some of the foliage off, which means that they're going to be able to last longer in those pots. So pots generally are okay, as long as the plant can be clipped, maintained, and you've got to get a good drainage and good watering. Irrigation systems are definitely something we recommend. They allow a more consistent flow of water, and equally fantastic drainage. So good perlite, bit of grit with the compost when you plant, and also we use mycorrhiza a lot, which helps root development.
And is there a point when they grow out of the pot and you really have to put them in the ground?
Yeah, afraid so. Some plants no, some plants you really can get away with it. I always tell people to kind of really keep an eye on what happens with the plant. It might lose its leaves or start yellowing slightly. You can of course increase the longevity of a plant through adding food and various substances. We use a silicone gel here now, which is really, really fantastic. So you can do that, but there it's definitely going to become a point where a plant needs to go in the ground, and it will be far beneficial for it longer term to do that. So yeah, big pots, as big as you can go.
Are there any particularly good architectural plants for shade?
So yes, absolutely. I mean, we have 2 shade houses here. Acers are particularly good, although acers need sun from above and cooler roots, so as long as it's dappled shade. We use Orcuba a lot. We have some really nice forms. A longifolia, it's got lovely long leaves that we've been growing for many years. What else? Vernontinus I use in dappled shade, again good clipper. We use lots of grasses such as Ludulas. I really like adding those in. A swathe of those. Yew, taxus I use quite a lot as well. So there's lots. Elaeagnus, again that's a funny plant because people see that as a hedging plant. It's a coastal hedging plant. I think it's brilliant as an architectural plant because it's so easy to clip it. It's a tough, tough as old boots plant really. Cryptomeria is a plant we use quite a lot. Now everywhere you read about conifers they want full sun. I think Cryptomeria can be in dappled shade too. That's a fantastic plant. It holds its shape really well. The form I'm thinking is Globosa nana, not the tree form, and that's really fantastic. We did a garden at Chelsea last year where we showed all the box alternatives. So I think that's quite a big sort of trend, is to look for alternatives. I'm a little concerned that Ilex crenatus is being used so much. I find it's a little unreliable in our wet winters. It's okay as an Nawaki, it seems to be okay, probably because they tend to go in pots, so you can control the watering. Pittosporum's a plant we haven't talked about. Pittosporum's a fantastic plant, brilliant for clipping, but it had a bit of a rough ride in December or November of 22 because it beyond -5 or below -5, if it's consistent, it can knock it back, especially because it's a plant that we clip hard. Same with Hebes. If you clip something really, really hard, you probably sometimes do it a little bit late in the season, and if you have an early, very cold period like that, you've got to be careful. But Pittosporums are brilliant plants. I mean, they're so adaptable as trees and blobs and balls. But I now warn people just to don't clip it too late. Leave it a little bit bushier for the winter. So I suppose one of the big things that's really important, I like this idea of it, especially with box, is thinking about the risk. So How can you mitigate that risk of having one variety? So using a mixed variety in a blobbery, I would say, is a really important lesson for us. I love using evergreen and deciduous plants in a blobbery. I think it also helps to mitigate the risk. So if something goes wrong with a variety, you haven't decimated your whole garden. And I think we need to probably be considering that. Thinking about what plant choice you have to adapt with our environment is really important.
To what extent is architectural plants, topiary, blobberies, etc., seen as a sort of English style gardening, or is it really quite international?
So in Japanese gardens, they use a lot of that swathes, the blobbery style. I think they're called karikomi. So that is quite Japanese standing. You see, of course, Noaki is, it's got Chinese and Japanese heritage actually. I'd say you see it quite a lot in European topiary. You see that all over Europe, obviously, in the big gardens, Versailles, etc. I don't think it's completely international. I think also, even still in England, we quite like trees with balls on. We call them full standards, or lollipops. Now, my understanding is that lollipops actually were devised as a means to get plants from Europe into England in a really efficient manner. So you put lollipops in a lorry. What I mean by that is a clear stem and a ball on top. And they used to put them into lorries, so it was a quick way of getting them here. And actually, the English customer base went, oh, they're fantastic, I really like those. And they carried on clipping them. But the intention was actually just to make them easier to transport. So that's quite an interesting thing about the difference in tastes. We tend to like things clipped more in the UK. In the rest of Europe, they're probably slightly looser in terms of the habit that they let plants grow to.
And the United States?
I personally think the standards of gardening in Europe and England they're slightly more developed, possibly in terms of topiary forms. I think we've been doing it traditionally for longer. But again, some of the gardens I've been to in California are incredible, and a lot of America has that. It depends where you go. But rewilding is obviously the complete contrast of what we do as a company. It's the complete opposite. We definitely added slightly more elements to that in our design. So sometimes architecture plants can work beautifully with meadows or with movement of grasses. And I mentioned earlier about aces, that colour. So I think we're trying to sort of slightly develop our garden design style to include a bit of both, but always at the forefront is the architectural plant.
So if you're interested in garden design, don't miss this video coming up next with a great range of garden design tips and tricks that will help you make your garden look better than ever. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.